Hey everybody, welcome back to Live. I'm your host, Nick Taylor, and today I'm hanging out with Ray Deck from StateChange.ai. Ray, how you doing today?
Doing great, man. Great to be with you again.
Yeah, I just realized my camera is making my head super massive. So compared to yours, this happened to be on a live stream I did with Gant Laborde a few years ago. He had a really good
Mhm.
camera, and basically I looked like this pinhead behind beside him. So I've just shrunk my head to make it not look like you're the guy in Beetlejuice. Anyways, thanks for joining me, Ray. We hung out last year. I'll go find that video at some point during the stream, but we were talking about low code tools and like how to leverage that. And this is stuff you've been working on at your company, StateChange.ai. And today we're still digging into some stuff that you've been digging into, and the stream's called "Just the Hardest 5%." And I guess for folks who are just tuning in or even tuning in later, what do you mean by just the hardest 5%?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've seen like tooling, like the low code, no code stuff, sort of particularly rise, of course, the last few years. We've seen AI get really good at creating a lot of the code.
Yeah.
Good templates and like there's lots of stuff on GitHub and what have you. And I think that means that our job as creators of software is really focusing just on that hardest 5% because so much of it
Yeah.
has been done for us or can be tooled away. And that means a real differentiator in our careers and the value we create for our customers is going to be that last bit. And so that's where I try to keep my attention.
Okay, cool, cool. And I know you've been in the industry for a while. For folks who might not be aware of state change, I guess how did state change come about, and what is it exactly?
Yeah, so state change was coming out of build first, my career in data science, then being a CTO, then making a few software companies that have had decent levels of success. I was trying to figure out my next act post pandemic and realized that there is we'll realize two things, right? The first is that there are a bunch of people who are trying to create using who didn't have traditional software backgrounds, who are trying to create using
Yeah.
these interesting low code no code tools, and who were getting themselves kind of stuck, right, at the
Okay.
point where it becomes most machine like, right? It's very easy, sort of, hey, as long as I'm sort of drawing things on pages, it's a little more straightforward. But like, how does the machine
Yeah.
think was getting to be a hard problem. And then the second thing I realized that most people don't require like having to go hire someone to go build it for them or even like big time consulting. They need just a little bit
Yeah.
of help. Right? So I sort of came up with this office hours model that's worked out pretty well over the course of the last couple of years. That's sort of been the central offering of state change, that
Okay.
combining with recording them so that people get like that 15 minutes at a time help really sort of is lets them get a lot more value for much more affordable investment.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I'm just gonna drop a link to state change in the chat here, and might as well show State Change some love. Here's the home. Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Sorry. That's Inception going on there. Here we go.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, folks, if you want to check out StateChange.ai, you can go ahead and sign up. You can read up a bit about here, and it's kind of fitting. We're talking about what is your hardest 5% today. So there's a video here. I'm not going to play that, but that's what we're here to talk about today. So I'm curious, what do you mean exactly by just the hardest 5%?
Well, like what kinds of things are in the hardest 5%?
Yeah.
It's really different for different people, right? So, like, one of the slogans we got inside State Change is that everybody has a hardest 5%. So
Okay.
the and by the way, if you look at the website, you might gather probably correctly that my hardest 5% is probably somewhere around like graphic design because that is not my strong suit. It looks so basic. And but there are things that are like easier for some people and harder for others. And I find there are lots of people who have lots of domain knowledge in business, actually even
Mhm.
have a pretty good intuition for like how software works because someone who's at their peak of their career today, like in their 30s or whatever,
Yeah.
they describe to me software or coding as something they did when they were in school, right?
Yeah.
They just haven't done it recently. So they have this intuitive idea that there's something can be done, that should be done, but then you start getting into the but wait, how do I think about nested looping? How do I think about
Mhm.
this higher dimensional SQL query or what have you? And like just what are those bits that are sticking you and
Yeah.
removing them so that you keep on moving fast. Because the parts where the tools allow you to go fast, let's go quick. The parts where it's
Yeah.
about your expertise, let's apply that. The part where it's like, oh wait, I'm trying to think higher dimensionally about like how a computer is going to deal with this. Let's
Yeah.
get you over that hump so you can then keep on running fast. And that's sort of what I mean by the hardest 5%, those things that stick us, and then let's
Yeah.
unstick it. Usually that's like that's the door that's keeping us from being able to get from like a table stakes, I just made a CRUD app, to something that really creates business value.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. Love that. Yeah, and like you're saying, everybody does have a hard 5%. It makes sense that we're not like, I mean, sure, there's maybe some unicorns out there that can do the whole thing, but I'd say those unicorns are unicorns for a reason. There's not
Yep.
many. But yeah, like I know I I struggle. This is kind of funny, but like I've done a ton of front end development and you give me designs, I can definitely, do that for you. I can convert it into a website. But when it comes to design myself, there's like parts of it that I'm aware of, like I think I'm good with spacing and like stuff like that. But I'm not a designer. And also it's like I'm that person that spends 2 weeks trying to figure out which fonts to put on a website. It's like even with tools like there are I guess speaking of tools, like for example, I've gone to Google Fonts and they try to pair things well. So I've typically done that, but even that it's like I'm still like which pair and stuff, and I don't know. Obviously, yeah, obviously how something looks is very subjective, but I still like I don't know how you feel about art and stuff, but like I like if I go to like an art gallery or something, not that I'm at one every day or anything, but I'll just look at something and I'll just be like, that looks really great, but I can't really quantify why it looks great. They just did something and kind of when like there's obviously putting in the work to get better at something, but there's still some innate talent that some people have that others don't, no matter how much work you put in.
Yeah.
I'm kind of going slight off topic maybe there, but it kind of ties into things being hard sometimes, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Um,
I think it's also about expression, right? Like
mhm.
one of the things I look for in a piece of art is going to be, what does this tell me about the artist, right? How is the artist communicating with me through the medium of this painting or this piece of writing or
Yeah,
sculpture, whatever. And I think this is one of the things where like technical mastery becomes challenging, right? Because
yeah,
if you understand your medium, then what you're doing is basically reducing the friction between yourself and the eventual consumer of your art or your product, because the medium's job, right, is to be a medium, is to be
yeah,
connecting those two things. And the big opportunity with software is that it's so mutable, has such an opportunity to reduce that friction between your brain and the brain of the customer, whoever you're, or the art patron, or whoever you're working with.
yeah,
And the trick is that that medium has its own tricks and own requirements. And how can you get it from here to there? And
yeah,
and like there was a time where people had to do that through punch cards, but
yeah,
now we've got much better technology, much better opportunities to be making that go across. So I think that when I think about like what you're talking about, like what makes good art, the best art is art that is fully expressing, or at least to the extent possible, the artist.
yeah,
And that's really what I look for in terms of what these tools, like we were talking about, like the Google font comparison tool, right? The thing
yeah.
that's allowing you to pick the font that's going to best express you and do it in least time, so you can focus on that next step of you expressing yourself.
Yeah, totally. And yeah. And I think it's great we're talking about this because I've talked to so many people and it tends to be typically people more new in their career or but like people just have this like either analysis paralysis or project paralysis like i I'm trying to do the thing but I can't and it's like I don't think I'm oversimplifying it, but I think you should just build something, ship what you have. You're just gonna keep iterating on it. And when I mean just ship it, I don't mean ship something broken and iterate to fix it. I mean like ship it and iterate like on a working piece, and then just keep going from there. And it's like I find at least with the people I've spoken to, it, they just kind of get blocked on like either have to finish the whole thing or like or it's not perfect. I mean, perfectionism is a whole other thing. That is like a major thing that paralyzes people, I think, because like perfect never ships, but I bring all this up because like obviously AI is at the forefront right now. Like, I mean, it's been around for a long time, but it really kind of exploded, at least for me. Like, I remember I did a live stream with Gannett Laborde, and he was talking about TensorFlow with TensorFlow JS. This was like a few years ago. But even with that, I wasn't doing much yet. It was really when ChatGPT 3.5 came out, like with the chat interface. Like, that's when all of a sudden this Cambrian explosion of like AI, or it was a catalyst to like at least bring it to, everybody, I think. And it's obviously changing how we work. And I'm curious, like with the people you work with, how does that look like these days?
Yeah, so I would say that the this is certainly a lot of AI got a lot more use starting like say in
Yeah,
October 2020, in October 22, which is when ChatGPT comes out, right, as a research project from OpenAI. And people immediately like I had started State Change as an office hours type community the
yeah,
previous summer, right? So summer 22, started going for 3 months. Okay, it's kind of like people bringing low code stuff, fine. And then all of
yeah,
a sudden, whole bunch of AI stuff, and it
yeah,
exploded across. And people were using ChatGPT primarily because that was the main
mhm,
chatbot out there. Google didn't really have anything interesting. Anthropic wasn't really in the game yet, and
yeah,
then so that moves along, and then you get to middle of 24, and Cursor comes out,
yeah,
and
yeah,
Copilot had been out before that, right? So
yeah,
GitHub Copilot was definitely super useful, but Cursor like really changed the game by making the chat bar over on the right like a primary way of coding, and this is
yeah,
sort of the basis of Andre Karpathy talking about vibe coding, right? And sort of that
yeah,
means you're sort of like coding through the sidebar to create the code that's in the middle. And
mhm,
then I think that got really, really good with Anthropic's 3.5 release in October of 24. Like all of
yeah,
a sudden, it was just very well trained on code and it was markedly better. I remember using that in like Advent of Code in December of
yeah,
24, and it was good for some specific things. And that shift, just even the last 6 months, of the number of people who are bringing like low codey stuff versus things they're trying to
mhm,
code or code questions they have to, hey, I built this huge thing with AI, and now I'm trying to figure out like why it doesn't work,
yeah, yeah,
and what that problem is sitting underneath. I'm seeing a big change in that over the course of the last 6 months. Like people are really starting to adopt that and become much more AI native. And as they do
yeah,
that, they're discovering the need, right? For they don't need to understand all the lines of code. They need to understand the most important lines in there, right?
yeah.
And what are the what and being able to first identify those important lines and then being able to gain mastery over them, I think is the next phase of being able to elevate oneself as a technology professional, allow the AI to do what it's good at, take care of a lot of table stake stuff, and focus on, like we
Yeah.
said, that last 5%.
Yeah, totally. Cause yeah, I was doing some contract work in between jobs before I started working at Pomerium, and it was to revamp their UI. This was like a Rails monolith app. They had React integrated, but it wasn't being integrated in the best way. So I moved them over to a project called Inertia JS, which I feel like you're probably familiar with. It was just that with Vite and the Rails asset pipeline got that all in place, and then basically I proposed to them to just you know the UI didn't look too bad initially, but I just suggested you're trying to move fast, you're just trying to deliver value. So I said, let's just go with Shad CN. They ship out of the box with beautiful, accessible components. You can still
Yep.
style them to your own branding if you want. And so they're like, okay, cool, let's do that. And because I had enough experience doing front end development, I basically vibe coded for like a whole week. I literally changed their entire application's UI, also wiring it up to. I had familiarity with Rails when I worked at Dev.to, so I was able to integrate it with the Rails part too. Uh, but like all that stuff I could have done myself, but the amount of time it would have taken me would have been bananas, like easily 40 hours just like writing those components and stuff. So I basically a lot of what I was doing, and we were talking about this briefly before the stream, but like, yes, I vibe coded it, but like I knew what I was asking for, and I find like when you're vibe coding, you kind of, if you want to be responsible about it, you have to put on the hat of code reviewer pretty much instantly as you start to vibe code. You get something out there, then you're like, okay, it works. That's great. Let's see what you did under the hood for the most part. Like the Reacts, like the JSX stuff, like in terms of that UI, I wasn't too concerned about because like it was just pulling in ShadCN stuff. But I was doing other checks like, okay, are these things really accessible the way you did something, or like, does this make
Mhm.
sense, or like basically just critiquing what it gave, and kind of treating it more like a pairing session with somebody with less experience is how I treated my vibe coding session. And I'm curious if that's how you treat it, or if that's what you tell people you work with, or I think you were saying before the stream, like a lot of the people that come to State Change aren't necessarily developers either.
Or not self-described. They are by
Yeah,
signing
not
a lease.
self-described. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right, and like they have like the thing they're trying to solve, right? And
yeah,
the question is like, what are they really great at? And like, let's make sure it's a magnifier for that part of their greatness. Kind of like the thing with the artist, right? So
yeah,
if they're a great writer, let's magnify their content. If they're a great designer, let's magnify their design. Don't have to go AI go create all the designs for you.
yeah,
But
exactly.
if you're thinking more about the data, like I got this one fellow who's working on software for leveraged buyouts of firms, like for private equity, and
Okay.
like what he cares about is the quantitative side. He cares about the data. He cares about the calculations, and he will turn
Yeah.
around and like use like V0, which is a
Okay.
wonderful tool to create ShadCN based components and be able to work
Yeah.
them into his app. He was originally building it using low code,
Okay.
as he realized what he needed was like more complicated interactivity, right? Because it's all financial
Hmm.
stuff. He shifted and said, "Well, I got to do this in code." And how do I do this in code? I'm sort of scared of this thing. And but by using the AI to be doing a lot of the table stake stuff in React, using
Yeah.
V0 to create components, and sort of using that conversational part to dial in the component needs, and then takes that
Yeah.
component, imports the React app. Now he's just trying to stitch it together, and then his focus is on the that like I say, the mathy part, right? The part that's making it
Yeah.
into a financial application. That was very cool because it's not like he had to never write a line of code. He didn't care about that part. He wanted to know what would
Yeah.
allow him, like, say, to move faster, right? So he,
Yeah.
instead of having to learn how to do all these pieces and like go through however much schooling or whatever he would be required to do that, let the software take care of most of those bits. This part
Yeah.
seems good. He can evaluate it based on the way it works. And then he's focusing attention, dialing in, even vibe coding those components that are complicated. And then
Yeah.
the part where he's actually getting into code and rolling up his sleeves, that's where the algorithmic part comes in, the math of it, whatever, for like doing those
Yeah.
financial calculations. And that's the part where he's most comfortable anyway. So you're putting strength against weakness.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess that brings up the topic of like, is it good enough? You know what I mean? Like obviously his focus was like, I just need to do these calculations. I need a UI to surface it so that I can show people, or use it myself. So like, you know, even if you vibe coded the UI in V0, and somebody who is a React dev might go, oh, well, actually, it probably doesn't matter unless there's like some major performance issue that shows up. Like it's probably good enough, and it's like, and I guess at that point, like it depends, what you're doing with that too. Like if he's trying to productize the tool, maybe this is the first phase. He got, like you said, the math part is the critical part. The UI was good enough, and then the proof of concept becomes like an actual business. Then you pull in a dev to maybe, you know do an audit of the front end maybe, or something. But it's, yeah, it's pretty wild how fast you can move. And like V0, or like I've been using bolt.new a lot as well from the StackBlitz people. And there's use cases that I didn't even think of. But like, because I started a role as a developer advocate in January, and so I was doing these video shorts, and I'll be doing a lot more. It's just got busy with talks and stuff. But like like where I work, we talk about like don't need to go into too much, but it's basically zero trust security principles, and I was trying to convey that through the analogy of airport security. And so it's a 60-second short about that, but I wanted to have some kind of video showing like going through like checkpoints at the airport. And so I went into bolt.new because like I'm very comfortable with web dev, and I was like, generate me like a 3D version of going to like the the uh the check-in counter, then going through security, then the gate and stuff. And it pulled in like 3JS, and I tried to describe it as best as possible. And it made this really nice 3D animation that was a web page, but I just put it in the video. And like that unblocked me because we have we have people on retainer to do like assets and stuff, but I was trying to ship this like very quickly. So like this like literally I did this within like an hour, and it totally unblocked me. And I was like, just not a use case I had thought of, but it 100% got me through the parts that I needed to really knock out without having to focus too much on. So it's I don't know. It's pretty wild what you can do. And I don't know. It's we were talking about this briefly before, but like any kind of content you produce as well, not just like applications, like LLMs are really good with text. So like I've been using it a lot for writing, and I find like typically what I do, I don't get it to write my blog posts. Like I actually just wrote a blog post yesterday, or I was like vibe writing it, I guess. But I literally pulled in like slides from a talk I gave, and like also just other blog posts I had done, a recent live stream I did with somebody. So it was like basically all my content, and I just got it to say, can you help me formulate a starting point to write? Because a lot of times for me, I get blocked by pen to paper initially. So that just 100% unblocked me, and then I could just start iterating on that. And just another. It kind of ties into the the top, the hardest 5%, because the stuff I needed to unblock me, which was just getting started, was like immediately taken care of by that. And then I could just spend the time actually doing that 5%, which is like really refining and making sure my words that were put there were actually in a good state. So uh,
Yeah.
also, hey, Ryan in the chat, sorry.
Right. The I think that's such an important idea that you were just raising, which was that you're using the AI to kind of reprocess, right,
Yeah,
your ideas. And I think that's people look at AI, they find it to be kind of magical, and they're like, oh wait, can it just create something for me from nothing,
yeah,
right? And you kind of have to call out the bolts or the lowables, et cetera, of the world. There's kind of offer that promise, like, hey, here's a tiny text box, you can type in
yeah,
10 words and you'll get a massive app, right? Or create a whole lot of value. But it's not really like that. It's like
yeah.
what it really is, it's an oil refinery, right? And in
Okay.
order for the refinery to create any value, right, it needs to have oil to start with, right? The crude. And the crude is your ideas.
Yeah,
And the more of your ideas you can be inserting in, the better result it will be able to create for you. That's the reason why, like, taking your old writing samples was so important to be getting that draft out.
yeah,
Or it's also why I find that when you're vibe coding, which is a term I hate, but the
yeah, yeah,
when you're coding through the chat interface, I'll even encourage people to do like speech to text, right? Record their voice because it makes
yeah,
them more chatty. They use more words, and the more words you describe what you want, the more it
yeah,
has to go on to figure out, okay, what's the actual right thing for me to do. People, I think, when they're typing, particularly, they're so worried about typing the wrong thing. Right? They think,
yeah.
hey, there's prompt engineering,
100%.
very precise. You need to get the right 7 words in here, like we're doing an old Infocom game or something. And
Yeah,
yeah, we're old. We're old enough that we get that joke. And
yeah, yeah,
but in fact, the way all of these AI systems work, and this is actually true for like the older stuff, like the stuff that Gantt Laborde would have been working on in TensorFlow's time,
yeah,
is it works with messy data, right? With noise in the signal. And if you just give it
yeah,
more data points, even if they're less clean, it does a better job. That's why dumping a bunch of your old writing in works. That's why talking at it for a while and giving it,
yeah,
paragraphs with the ums and ahs and all that. That's why that tends to work. But when you do that and you allow it to act as that refinery, it can
Yeah.
produce really valuable, refined oil on the other side that can be creating value for you. Now, that's not a done product, but it's a product that's
Yeah.
moved really far along the line for you, and that's the reason why you're able to go from months of work to like that 1 week of work you were talking about.
Yeah, 100%. And also plus one to like just transcribing. Like I tend to, well, now that it's getting, there's less snow now, I'm walking outside more, but I typically go for like a long walk in the evening. And to my point before, what I was saying, where it's like sometimes like I just know what I want to write. Like I just finished a feature at work or something, and I'm gonna write about it. It's fresh in my head. I can literally just type it and go. But a lot of times it's like I'm still that keyboard paralysis. And to your point, I found it super helpful to just, I'm out walking and there's ums and ahs. I might be incoherent with like the flow of what I'm saying, but I record it all, and then I can dump that in too, like you said. And because LMs are really good with text, and the fact that it's your own text, one, it makes it obviously more authentic, but also just it's literally like a second brain to help organize your ideas a bit to some degree, you know. And it's like I don't know, I found it such an unblocker for me, um, and and also because like for good or bad, AI is here now, and a lot of expectation is to ship things faster to, whether that's like a blog post or like a feature. So, it's, uh, I don't know. I feel like I know there's skeptics or people who are just like anti AI, and there's good reasons too. I know there's definitely some ethics issues there for sure, but I don't know. I feel like if you're not leveraging these tools, even if you don't like them, it's like I think it's going to be detrimental to your career. Honestly, like not just as a dev, but like anything, like because it's going to allow you to move faster and stuff. And just curious about your thoughts there. And also, hi Marie from over on LinkedIn there.
I think
Oh
every
yeah,
time new tech
okay.
Oh, yeah, we should talk more about Ryan's question too, but I think every
Yeah,
time new technology comes, the people whose job it was to do that job that's now being automated say, "Oh, there's no way that's going to be as good as what we're doing, and nobody should be doing that."
yeah,
I think that we're talking about like entering into mass production, right? I mean,
hmm,
this probably goes all the way back to Eli Whitney in terms of the Industrial Revolution. It goes all the way back to Gutenberg. Oh, printing books. No, we
yeah,
need to do it the old way, which is, people need to be writing them by hand and doing those hand copies. Otherwise, that's where the real
yeah,
quality
yeah.
comes in. And like this, I think that we just need to look at the new technology and ask, what is it going to be good for? How does it create more value?
Yeah, no, totally. And yeah, you were saying Ryan had a pretty good question here. I'll put it on the jumbotron here. So he's saying I'm trying to do a talk on how to work with AI to code. AI was good at different things. Thinks differently about how code works, abstractions versus statistics. Any ideas there beyond prompt engineering?
Yeah, you were just talking about your own vibe coding experience. Would you mind sharing your perspective on this, Nick?
Yeah, for sure. So um, the way I treat it is like I have an idea, or I've got some work I need to do, so I'm just like I have a pretty clear head with what I need to do. And then you know I'll just start off in the prompt. There's a couple of things I do actually. First, I'll formulate like my idea, like okay, I need a dashboard or whatever, and then like I'll write it out like just the way I would very informally. And I forget where I heard this trick, but what I do is I go into a tool like Claude or ChatGPT. I paste in what I wrote. I say, can you format this for as a code prompt for like GitHub Copilot or for like Windsurf or for Cursor? And then all of a sudden I get a more formalized like because it knows how these things take it in. And so like I do kind of like a pre-processing of my prompt. And then I paste that in. And hey Roxy, how's it going? I go with that, and then because I've done a test, I've done like just paste it in as I would have written it, and I do get something, but it's not as good. And when I use the formatted code prompt, it'll structure it better. But I also might look at it and go like, oh yeah, I should add a few other points in there. Like, I definitely want this to be like a tan stack project, not a Next.js project or something. So, anyways, that's kind of where I start, and then Windsurf or Cursor or GitHub Copilot will just start doing its thing, and it's going to think on things. And once I get a result, I first just see, like, literally visually, because it's typically web development stuff I'm doing. I'm going to go look,
Mhm.
does it actually work? Okay, if it works, that's great. Now let me actually see what it's proposing to change. And that's where I start becoming critical of it, because just because it works doesn't mean it's good. So like, a lot of times, what I've noticed, at least with like UI development, is it's not always great with accessibility. Not that it does stuff like, here's a div of type role button and stuff, but sometimes it'll just be stuff like it'll forget a label or something. So there's stuff there, or like maybe it's a React component and it's not using context or something. It's using something else, or like, maybe I tweak it to say like, no, I'm actually using Zustand for state management. So like, there's like a lot of things that go into it, but the main message here is like, I really put on my code reviewer hat at that point, and that's when it just kind of becomes like I'm working with somebody less senior than me, and it's just a back and forth. That's how I've typically done it. Uh, I don't know if your experience is similar or not, but
Yeah, I think there are sort of two models we can think about how we're going to use AI as it relates to the job of making software.
yeah,
When I call it teacher and the lackey.
yeah,
So I find that the lackey is a lot of what you're describing, right? You're treating it
yeah,
as the junior, you're giving it instructions, it goes does stuff, for you.
yeah,
But the trick is, it's actually not that much smarter than you are, right? And it
yeah,
definitely gets you in trouble if you have it create things you don't know how to evaluate or how to test, right? This gets to like
yeah,
a comment right I made along there of API hallucination. How do you know if it hallucinated? And you're making
yeah,
a great point. Like on front end code, you can test it. Does it look right?
yeah,
For nothing, like sending back a screenshot saying, "This is how it looks. This doesn't look quite right," and then it takes care of it. I have found
yeah,
the instruction "this less ugly" works remarkably well.
yeah,
The and because even when it makes mistakes, but the other half of it is the teaching part. Because I think sometimes what happens, especially people who are newer to software or they're working outside their domain, or people who are like people who I work with who are they're domain experts in like some area of business, but not necessarily software itself.
yeah,
They are asking, "Hey, go do this big thing for me," right?
yeah,
And the trick is, if you ask it to do something that you don't really have command of yourself, you don't really know how to evaluate it, it can go really quite off the rails for you. So what
yeah,
I find that the job is you want to learn. You want to learn enough about it that you can act in that kind of editorial role you were describing before. And that's when we want to use
yeah,
AI as a teacher. So I will go, and so what I encourage people to do is figure out which part do you understand, which part is like you don't yet understand. And for those
yeah,
two, that the part you do understand, that's the lackey part. And the part that you don't yet understand, you want to use as a teacher. Get smart about that. And then as you get to that elevated knowledge, which probably includes some building along the way, you're then able
yeah,
to apply that knowledge and get leverage from the AI as lackey to be able to do even more work for you. Where we get stuck is
mhm,
where I ask it to do something that I don't really understand in the first place, and
yeah,
then the AI doesn't really understand what you want and sort of gets itself into a corner. And the only way out of that is through elevated knowledge, and that's where using it as a teacher becomes helpful.
yeah, totally. No, love that. Um, the other thing I've noticed, in terms of like when I'm interacting with like some kind of agent like that, whether it's GitHub Copilot's agent mode or Cursor or Windsurf, is after the initial prompt where you say like, make me whatever, or do whatever. I find when you respond, like when you want to refine what they're doing, if you ask for too many things in the same post prompt, it doesn't work
Yes.
well. Like if
Yep.
I'm there, like, okay, the color's wrong, this state is incorrect. If I give it too many things, it might work sometimes, but I've found, in my experience at least, it's better like, okay, change the header color to blue now. Wait till it does that, then go to the next thing. Okay, the state's incorrect, the logic's reversed or something. I I don't know if it's just like an actual human where it's like, "Hey, you gave me too many things to do. Just give me a second here." But I've found I've just noticed that as well through experience prompting as well.
Yeah. That yeah, that is definitely a challenge I have seen too. You know, the other thing that I find in that zone is that in addition to it sort of getting stuck like that,
Yeah,
is that it's to edit the wrong files,
yeah,
right? It's also a question of scope. So what I find, so this gets to Brian's question, like how do you sort of keep it, in bounds? How do you get more value out of it? One of the things I found is like giving it more instructions that are
yeah,
not so much like here's 17 things I want you to do, but here are restrictions on what I want. Don't do this. Look
yeah,
only at this file, right? I want you to style this using Tailwind. Don't make CSS. I want you to
yeah,
use this particular set of components that are from our storybook or whatever. Don't go
mhm,
creating totally new stuff. And
yeah,
those kinds of strictures I find also help keep it on the straight and narrow, and also fall in the category like that's stuff you have to understand in order to be able to get the most
yeah.
value out of it.
Yeah, totally. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because like a lot of the editors or agents have like rules files. So like when you create your project, you can like to your point, you can say like, okay, this is a Next.js project. It uses Tailwind, it uses Shadcene. So you have all that additional context, which
Yep.
I found super helpful. And I found this also really super helpful in ChatGPT and Claude, where you can. Uh, I don't know when ChatGPT got projects, but I fell in love with with Claude projects a while ago, and then I'm back on ChatGPT as well now, and they have it too. And I found it super useful because like for example, like my new role as a developer advocate, I'm working at this security company now, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm brand new to. Haven't really done platform engineering or anything, so like I put all that context in the instructions. So like when I ask questions, like I tell it, like be very detailed when I ask about something because and maybe I'll tweak that over time as I'm more familiar with things. But I've found stuff like that. It does come back to just the right context, so I've found that super helpful as well in terms of like my learning path of certain things and it's something you iterate on too. It's kind of like writing tests, like you start off with a few, you catch some edge cases over time, so and your suite of tests just gets better and better. And I find the same thing for rules, whether it's in like Windsurfer or Cursor or like Copilot or one of the chat agents, So it's I found that super helpful too.
What I find super neat is like you put those two things together and you realize that it's very happy with a list of thou shalt nots, right? Like here
Yeah,
are a bunch of
yeah,
restrictions.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Gets very unhappy with a whole set of I want you to do these 17 things.
yeah,
And and that's actually a management thing. Like if you the same thing kind of applies if you're managing junior professionals. If you give
yeah,
them a list of rules, they can go check that list of rules. Okay, have I done these thou shalt nots? Right? Because that's
yeah,
basically what rules are. And then you give them a list of instructions, and it's like, here are the 10 things I need you to do. They come back, they've done three of them.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
we can talk about that, but like I always thought about that as being human nature, but here the AI is doing it too. So something beyond human nature that causes them to do this. So
Yeah,
somewhere like you give it lots of restrictions, which you kind of need to repeat, and then but then you have it do the instructions one step at a time. And I find if you do that, you can stutter your way
yeah,
through it, and it goes a lot better. And that some of the better agentic setups are smart in that they're saying, "Oh, here are the 10 instructions. I'm going to break these
yeah,
into 10 separate prompts that will run them. And I do one, two, three, four, five.
yeah,
Even to the point that it's like it's very little text between each one. Like, okay, now we're doing step
yeah,
two, now we're doing step three. And like that, but because each of them has their own prompt and therefore their own tool call, it's handling them in a much better way. And the question becomes, can you making sure that it's breaking it down into those steps? It's one of the reasons also that the reasoning models are so useful because they're all about
yeah.
making plans.
Yeah, no, totally. And that also reminded me of something from Matt McGinnis from Virtual Coffee, where we're both a part of. I did a live stream with him last year, just talking about prompt engineering, and there's a lot of things like initially I would fix spelling mistakes and stuff, and he's like, it doesn't matter, it'll figure it out, and like so not that I try to do spelling mistakes on purpose, but sometimes when I'm typing fast and I say like, okay, I'm like nowadays I'm just like I know it's gonna know what I mean, or it'll or if it in a worst case scenario, it's gonna say, "Did you mean this?" And then I say yes or whatever, and so it's like it's funny how it doesn't have to be perfect. And I also like what you said. Like it's true that by giving constraints, it works better. And this kind of it's not exactly the same thing, but I remember in university we had to do math proofs, like to prove something wasn't, and it was always easier to say, well, if it's not this, then it's immediately, it's not true. So like kind of like not exactly the same thing, but it just made me think of that because you're just saying constraints. So like, oh, if it's that thing, then boom, it's already out. So anyways, little side note. But yeah, no, what's Ryan saying here? He said, I've done some insane stuff with Windsurf, refactor libraries in a TypeScript, writing unit tests. I find it's better with tasks like that than generating large bits of code. Structured tasks are best. Yeah. I, I have noticed that AI is pretty good at writing tests, like at least unit tests. I'm not sure about end-to-end tests, but like it's because it can see all the code paths, so it can like just generate pretty much your entire unit test. And like obviously, I think you should still validate these things, but this is just another thing to move faster. I'm curious, like, in terms of, like, the people you've been working with, if I don't know if you can speak to it, but, like, what have been some interesting use cases that people have used AI for, if you're allowed to speak about their projects or, like, even if it's, vague about what they did? I'm just kinda curious.
Well, I'm seeing a lot more AI get used for building out front ends,
Okay.
like massively. Like it is really a compelling competitor to the low code front ends. Like low code
Yeah.
front ends are actually more desirable for people who are themselves designers because it allows you to have a
Yeah.
very high level. But if you don't care about that as much, and frankly, a lot of people who are attracted to working with me tend not to be because I'm more quantitatively focused.
Yeah.
They're like, oh wait, I can take care of this. I don't have to go write all that stuff. That's awesome, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to offload a lot of that responsibility, because the thing is, like, most UI work is a structured task. Make a form that
Yeah.
does this, a table that does that. These are things actually kind of hard to code, but mechanical. And the AI is able to
Mhm.
take that and run with that and do that. And you combine that with like giving it a little bit of structure. Like, for example, I like to use the Catalyst components from the Tailwind folks
Okay.
and and so like, hey, here's a library of components, work with those, right?
Yeah.
And now you've got a style guide, you have a component library, and you've given enough constraints, it's able to go much faster.
Yeah.
But folks who are building in state change tend to be using AI a lot for that part of the job. They also use AI a lot, particularly if they've already built something in low code, for inserting some additional piece of code into their apps. And
Mhm.
that's like, I think as something as that developers, particularly on the front end, don't run into as much because you're building an app. But the way
Yeah.
that these business types would do it is that they have like, I'm going to use this tool to go build 60% of the app I need. Now, how do I get the other 40%? Like, I don't know, charting
Yeah.
is a good example of this, right? Charts are
Yeah.
terrible for most of these local systems. Something that lots of code can make and do relatively easy. How do you insert those? And
Yeah.
so making those widgets that are going to be injected through code is actually, I think, probably the number one use case I'm seeing for how people are using
Yeah.
AI software generation point of view. And then the flip side is I'm seeing more people using AI as their front end.
Mhm.
And that's like the emerging thing is like, and
Yeah.
this is like where model text protocol becomes really interesting, which
Yeah.
is technology from it's been around for like 4 or 5 months. And where the idea is to just make it simpler, right, for people who provide various services to, have those services consumed directly through a chat or agentic interface, so that you could be using Claude or Cursor or whatever. And now
Yeah.
instead of saying I'm going to big front end and people are going to use my app in order to consume my service, I don't have to consume. I don't have to make a front end at all, right?
Yeah.
I just have effectively just an API that can work with any of these front ends, and all they need to do is sort of drop in how you talk to me. I mean, that technology is really nascent, but that kind
Yeah.
of leading edge stuff is the kind of thing that I see from State Change, and I think
Yeah.
that's really where where the puck is going, and there's a lot of the future of front end work that's going to be about how does it embed inside those environments, right, as
Yeah.
opposed to embedding that inside your app.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm gonna drop a video here. Just let me pop it on the chat. Um, this is I'll drop it in our chat too if you want to just grab it, Ray. Um, so I was at All Things Open AI in when was it? Mid March, I think. And Rachel Neighbors was there. She's worked on at many places, including the React team, and she
Mhm.
has this talk called "The Death of the Browser," and it kind of because like at the conference, everybody was talking about MCPs and Model Context Protocol and the
Mhm.
MCP servers and so on, and the UX of how we access things is definitely going to change. And I was actually listening to the Contagious podcast, Tejas Kumar's podcast. He was chatting with Kent C. Dodds, and Kent C. Dodds is all in on MCPs, but it's like the whole flow of how we're going to interact with things is definitely going to change. Like in the future, your SEO might be like, oh, do you have an MCP server? Are you discoverable? Because like,
Mhm.
just it's still early days for MCPs, but like it's just a great way, like even if it's maybe not the perfect technology, like it's people some people have argued it's not really a protocol because it's still just web stuff, but it's just basically some kind of standardization, which is the main point, I think. But you know, this unlocks things where like I'll be able to ask whether I'm in like Claude or some kind of MCP client saying like, okay, book me a reservation for four at my favorite restaurant. And you don't even have to go to a website. It just knows enough about you to do all that, or like book my flight, only $400 max for like a cheap flight economy or, stuff like that. And there's still going to be some concept of a UI, obviously, as a starting point, probably, but it's just interesting how things are changing. Not to say that the browser is literally dying like tomorrow or something, but I mean, we still have Marquee in the browser, so but it's just interesting the way things are going, and you know, uh, I don't know. I'm curious to see where it goes. Like one of the things, like I generally don't plug work on this, but like we're interested in MCPs because they're not really secure right now, and we're looking in the security story of that. There's like there's been advancements in the standard to improve like auth N, auth Z in there. Because like right now, what happens is like, for example, if I want to connect to Notion or something, there's an MCP server for that, but from what I've seen, you basically create like a service account, so you get like some token, and then you pass that in, and it's got a certain amount of privilege to do whatever, but it's not really you. And there's like other guardrails that are in place when it's actually you going to one of the like accessing Notion versus like the service account. So like we've been just digging into it's all open source, but we've been digging into like just respecting principle of least privilege for accessing these resources, because like a lot of these agentic systems right now are probably taking on they probably have more access than they should, basically. um
Right, which also kind of gets to the a lot of these services that have APIs don't
yeah,
have a very sophisticated security story, right? It's like, hey, here's your
yeah,
API key, go to right? And then you say,
yeah,
well, I want to use it with my agent. Now you have to hand over all the responsibility to the agent. And I think that
yeah,
that will probably create demand for that kind of security service by those
yeah,
by those APIs. The but the other thing I think about that is like just how mutable that that setup is,
yeah,
and one of the things I find myself saying a lot in the context of state change is I think say we're you know originally we were talking about moving from building with low code tools to building with AI tools, and
yeah,
now we're talking about building with AI to building for AI.
yeah,
The AI itself is becoming a big enough market that that is something we want to be focusing on. Like, how do they want to consume? Where are the holes over there? That is actually
yeah,
now it's gone from being a small supplier to a big source of demand.
yeah, totally. And it's I think it's gonna unlock a lot of things too, because like you can obviously do a lot of these flows today. There's just a lot of like, human intervention. So if you can act upon a human with the right amount of privilege for each of those services you connect to, or I think it's definitely going to generate interesting things, because like I could totally see like travel seems like an easy one to describe, but like I want to go to, like, I don't know, Mexico for 2 weeks. This is my budget. Get me a flight and a nice hotel with like 4 stars or 3 stars or whatever, and that's something that's literally going to be possible. Whereas like right now it's still doable, but you go to like Expedia or Booking.com or whatever you use, you're doing all these searches yourself. You might have alerts set up, and then maybe if you're a dev, you have fancy things to pull in with webhooks when something happens. I don't know, but there's a lot of manual process still there, and like
Yeah.
I don't know. I I think it's one. I think it's exciting as somebody working in tech if you can work on those problems, but also I think just for consumers in general, it's gonna be a nice unlock. Once it's in a good place.
And I think it's gonna be a gradient between those two things. Like one of the reasons why MCP is getting so much attention is because it's so darn useful, and so darn useful
Yeah.
for people who are actually business of making software, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm pretty. I don't know for sure, but I think the number one MCP client in the world is Cursor.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, that's where most people do it. It's the first one was Claude, but I think Cursor is far more popular. It's like much easier to work with too.
Yeah.
But so, like, things like what I will do, which is, hey, go get this work done, and then send me a text and set up an issue in GitHub for me that's going to keep track of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
totally.
those it's
Yeah.
like it takes a lot of work out of it. Or like when right now, something that's sort of more of a more straight. We used to be straightforward automation type use cases. A lead comes in, send back an
Yeah.
autoresponder and send a ping, right? So that the human being knows. How about now?
Yeah.
Lead comes in, go do some research, look up their
Yeah.
website, look them up on LinkedIn, go figure out what they're about, create a reasonable, email, have it get
Yeah.
reviewed by a second guy, and then send it. And now you
Yeah.
have something that looks much more attentive in a very short period of time. It's still using that same agentic and AI judgment and text creation profile that is creating more value for the customer right
Yeah.
away. And none of it requires crazy new technologies to be involved. It's all here today.
Yeah, and I think this is like we're getting close to the end here, but I think this just kind of comes full circle back to just the hardest 5%, because all these things you were just talking about, they're things you can obviously do yourself, but the fact that you can offload them to something else, you can focus on the more important things. Once you've got all that client information, maybe it drafts that email like you said, but you can read it or maybe just critique like what it brought back, and that's like the important work, and potentially also the hardest 5. So I I think it's just fitting you said that, but it's like, and to your point too about like the lost jobs, like you were mentioning before, like I know that's what people always talk about, like AI is taking our jobs. You still hear that discourse, and I mean, I think to be realistic, some people will lose their jobs. Like, there's no candy coating it. But, to your point about like, when we had mass production and stuff, it's like if we go way back, like when cars came out, like Henry Ford, here's this gas guzzling 4-wheel monstrosity, and all these people that were, I don't know what you call the driver of a horse and buggy, but they're like, oh, we're gonna lose all our horse and buggy jobs, and yes, they did, but all of a sudden there was the creation of taxis, drivers, you know what I mean? It's like their job moved to something else. And I know it's not exactly the same because like I feel like with AI things are just moving a million times faster, but there will be jobs lost, but still think there's a lot of opportunity there, and like even if AI lets you move faster, that means you can do more things. So it doesn't mean they're not going to hire more people. If they can hire more people that are productive, they can do more too. So like, I don't know. I don't know what your thoughts are there. I know we're close to the end here, but
Yeah. Well, the number of web engineers, at the beginning, 25 years ago, how many web engineers were there? Not that many at all,
yeah,
and like it's not like this is a centuries old guild that's all of a sudden being, turned
Yeah,
over. We work in technology. Technology is all about this changing state of the art about how things get done, and we expect it to
yeah,
keep getting subverted on the regular. And AI is just sort of the next turn on the wheel on that. So how can we do what we should be asking is like, how do we keep on sharpening ourselves, keep on learning,
yeah,
keep on growing so that as the world keeps on shifting, we keep on creating, new and new value, right? That's making use of
yeah,
the new technologies around us. And I think that's the exciting part. That is a lot of what we do over at State Change, where we're talking to people who are sort of didn't think of themselves as software people, but now all of a sudden, because these tools, because these opportunities, they see the
yeah,
opportunity in software going in that direction. And I think people who describe themselves as people who are just being web developers or what have you are going to start
mhm,
intersecting with like these other tools and these other opportunities that come from it. And they won't
yeah.
look like what they were before, but there's a great opportunity for growth, I think, for just about everyone.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think in general, it's just like an exciting time to be a software developer, or even if you aren't, like you said, like the people that are able to bring their ideas to life by just leveraging these tools, you know? So it's definitely think it's super exciting times. I dropped a link to State Change again for folks to check out, and I'm just gonna drop link where people can go ahead and connect with you, Ray. This was awesome chatting. Always love hanging with you. You always have very thoughtful insights into things, so definitely appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, with that, uh, I don't have another live stream plan for Nikki T Live yet because I've been traveling a lot for work, but there'll definitely be something in the pipe soon. But thanks everybody for checking out the stream today. And Ray, if you don't mind just staying on for a second, and everybody else, take care.